Howdy, everybody. So I have some more time here. I'm in my truck and I'm in between loads. So I think I'm 34-hour reset. So I wanted to do my first question and answer session. Now, I've never done this before on YouTube, so you got to bear with me. I'm more of a Facebook guy, so I typically do a lot of social media on Facebook with a select small group of owner operators. And it wasn't until recently that I started doing the YouTube thing. So I don't know all the tricks and bells and whistles with YouTube. And one of the things about YouTube is typically if I'm doing a live video, especially with my phone, I have a hard time reading that small print that are in the comment section. So I'll occasionally catch a comment here or there. And recently someone said, I need to answer questions. Well, I never saw the question. So I'm like, maybe I should do a question and answer session, and that'll give people an opportunity to jump in and ask questions. So we will try this and see how it goes. I'll start talking about a topic, and then if people join into the group and they want to ask a specific question about being an owner operator, I will do my best to answer it. Or if you have a question about Crete carrier, I'll do my best to answer that as well. If I don't have an answer, I will try to find you an answer. And I'll end up putting it in the comment section once the video is completed. And generally speaking, when you have a question in any of my videos that you want me specifically to answer or try to answer, put it in the comment section after the video has ended, and then I will see it. But if you make a comment while the video is being recorded, very likely I will not see it. It's just that it's too small print. I cannot read and talk at the same time. I haven't developed that skill set yet. So, I've been an owner operator at Crete for 10 years, and I started out, on a shoestring budget. Bought my first truck. I think I only had about $12,000. And I bought a 2012 Freightliner Cascadia. I bought that in the fall of 2016. And I've only had about 2 years of, trucking experience, so I was very early in my career. But I knew, right away, I wanted to be an owner operator. There's just no doubt in my mind, whether I should be an owner operator or a company driver. It's like, I got to be an owner operator. That was my dream, So I put $3,000 down on a truck, and I left the terminal in Lincoln, Nebraska. I made 30 miles before I had my first breakdown. It was what a disappointment, right? And of course, it was DEF. It was DEF related. The DEF, if a truck is sitting for any length of time, the DEF will crystallize, and the crystals will form a blockage inside the supply lines, from the DEF pump on the driver's side all the way to the run box on the passenger side. So if the truck sits for a long time, it can form crystals and all that stuff. So let's see here. Make sure we're doing good. Okay. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So, the first breakdown was in first 30 days of becoming an owner operator. I was not ready for it. I didn't have a lot of money saved up. I didn't even have any credit cards at the time. And I ended up going to a Detroit diesel shop. And at that time, Crete was willing to pay for it because I just bought the truck. But, we were off to a bad start, very bad start, and these early, Cascadias is when the after treatment systems first came out, and they were causing all kinds of problems. Those trucks had all kinds of problems. This is the greenhouse gas emission system 10, EPA 10. My last truck was a 2019. It was a EPA greenhouse gas system 17 for the year 2017. And they've made a lot of improvements to those systems over the years, and they made it much more reliable. I learned a lot. The first truck is like your starter truck. It's like your starter house. You're going to learn a lot about being a homeowner when you buy your first house. You're going to learn a lot about being an owner operator when you buy your first truck. But a lot of guys make a mistake of getting attached to the truck, and I certainly did on that first truck. You are so excited to have your own truck. You want to customize it, and you start putting money into it, and really, you should be looking at selling that truck after about 3 years. You should be looking at rotating that truck every, so generally, if you buy the truck at 400,000 miles, you probably want to get rid of it around 750,000 miles. Nowadays, with the newer trucks, they come with the manufacturer's extended warranty. Freightliner has the EN4 warranty, and that'll carry you all the way up to 750,000 miles. So if you buy the truck at 400,000 miles, you may want to keep it up to 750,000 miles. But as soon as that warranty out, you better get rid of it, because as the trucks age, every little thing breaks, fails, needs to be replaced. Basically that truck needs to be recycled. But because you're attached to that truck, you keep throwing money in it, it becomes a money pit. You've been better off, you know, walking away from that truck with no money, just get out from underneath it and go buy something newer, and drive that for 3 years. And it's just getting into this rotation. Every 3 years, you're going to get in a different truck. You may also want to try to work your way up the food chain, so you start out with a truck that is a little bit older, a little more miles, and then your next truck's a little bit newer, a little less miles, and by the end of your career, you're paying cash for trucks. I know guys who drop 75 grand cash buy a truck. That ultimately that's where you want to reach, is that kind of level of financial strength. But when you're first starting out, you're starting out at the bottom, and oftentimes that's a shoestring budget. So if you are limited on cash when you're starting out, it would be prudent for you to try to get a business credit card, like American Express Plum Card, which I often recommend, or try to get like the Navy Federal Credit Union business card, or get a personal card. Navy Federal Credit Union has a personal card. I got one with a $20,000 limit, gives you 2% cash back. Those are good. And the reason is because you're limited on cash, but you're probably going to have breakdowns. So you may not have the financial strength to pay cash for your breakdown, but you at least have that credit card to fall back on. That could make the difference between whether or not you are able to survive your first year in business, is your ability to pay for breakdowns. And you may need it when you need a tow truck too, because a lot of tow truck companies want the credit card before they even hook up to your truck. A lot of people, I would say a lot of new owner operators or rookie owner operators, they're like, oh, I'm not going to get on a tow. They're scared of the tow truck. Well, let me tell you something. The tow truck is your best friend, because imagine it's freezing cold. Who's gonna come pick you up, take you to a nice warm hotel room, get your truck at the dealership, get you back to where you have internet access, hot food. It's the tow truck driver. So don't be afraid of the tow truck driver. Tow truck driver can be, one of your greatest resources available to you. Yeah, they're expensive, no doubt about it. $1,000 for a tow, that's not something you're looking forward to. But the tow truck driver is there to help you. Be nice to the tow truck driver. I've been towed half a dozen times. After a while, it becomes no big deal. It's only the rookie owner operators who make it a big deal. They're like, oh, I avoided the hook, or don't want a tow truck driver. Well, the experienced owner operators know that it's just part of the business. What's the difference between having a good day on the road, driving 500 miles, and a day at the shop and getting maintenance done? There's no difference. It's just part of the business model. It's just another day of work. Whether you're putting in 500 miles or you're getting maintenance on the truck, it's just another day of trucking. If you get it towed, that's just another day of trucking. It's just part of the industry. You know, after a while, these things are routine, day in and day out. You drive 500 miles, truck into maintenance, drive some more miles, truck gets towed, drive some more miles, truck gets in maintenance. Some guys say it's like driving from one breakdown to the next breakdown. You're driving to make money to pay for the next breakdown. That was certainly true prior to the extended warranty program, the manufacturer extended warranty program. It was very, very hard to make a profit because trucks were breaking down all the time. And when they came out with that new extended warranty, I tell you, that was a game changer, absolute game changer. It took a lot of risk out of the owner-operator business model. And now guys could buy, a truck with more confidence that they're going to make it. It's like, if you're interested in a truck, I think now is as good a time as ever been into becoming an owner-operator, because you can get in. I know here at Crete, you can get into a quality used truck with 400,000 miles, with the extended warranty up to 750,000 miles. You can get in that truck with a down payment of $4,000 to $6,000. That's a great deal. It's a great deal. That's one of the reasons why people join Crete. It's because you get, stuff with a discount. Crete sells their truck more closer to a wholesale value than a retail value. That same truck being on a dealer lot could be 20 grand more. It could, Crete saw it for 63. You can see it on a dealer lot for 83. So it's a great value. And a lot of guys say, well, what's the gross revenue at Crete, or how many miles you get at Crete, or what's the pay rate at Crete, and they don't realize the discounts, the value of the discounts. Now, see, the guys who are owner operators at Crete, they understand the value of those discounts. It's hard to quantify. How much is that worth to you to be able to buy a truck at wholesale versus buying at retail? Another thing Crete does is they have a loaner truck program. So let's say, for example, your truck breaks down and your truck is at Freightliner for 2 weeks. You let Crete know. They may make another truck, a company truck, available to you to drive while your truck is broke down. Now, you'll have to pay for that. You'll pay so much per week to rent that truck, but it's better than sitting in a hotel room for 2 weeks waiting for your truck repairs. So you got to think about that. What's that worth to you? Because if you're on a spot market, you're SOL. No one's going to, make a truck available to you for a 2 week period. That's too bad for you. Similarly in other carriers, but at Crete, they'll make a truck available to you. So that could make your business survive, the first year or two. Just having a partner in Crete that says, hey, we'll keep you moving, we'll keep you making money, so we have a truck you can rent from us while your truck is being repaired. And I used that several times, and it was great, because you're at wit's end. When your truck goes down, you're like, I don't know, what the hell am I going to do? It's this is a huge cost. When you talk to Crete and they say, well, we understand cash flow is important, so you're a good driver, we'll make a truck available to you. You just pay us, so much per mile for renting the truck, and you just go right on about your business, versus paying $100 a night at a hotel room. So you got your cash flow has come to a complete stop, and now your expenses are mounting up. So renting a truck is huge benefit. Now, do other carriers offer that? Nope. Do you get down in the spot market? No. So what's that worth to you in your small business to have that option available to you? It's another reason to stay at Crete, so that's how I look at it. I was thinking, what would be, for an owner operator, the ideal amount of money they would need to set aside for truck breakdowns. If you're first starting out and say you put $5,000 down on a $63,000 truck, you still owe $58,000 plus interest. It's just like, that's going to take you a few years to pay that truck off. How much money do you need to have set aside for truck repairs? And I think the ideal answer would be, in a perfect world, we all know it's not perfect, but if you could manage it, you would have $20,000 set aside in something like a high yield savings account that's earning you 4% interest, just for truck repairs. That's not counting your retirement funds. You don't want to touch your retirement funds for truck repairs. So, it's, can you get that when you're first starting out? Probably not. But should you be able to get that within the first 6 months? Yeah, you should. You should be able to save $20,000, put that into a high yield savings account within your first 6 months. If you have a truck breakdown and it costs you 10 grand, you have the money for it. Then you got to get back up to 20,000. So, maybe it takes you a full year to get that 20,000. But that would set you off on a very good start to have $20,000 sitting there in a high yield savings account for maintenance. That would set you up for success for sure. So I don't see any questions yet, and everyone keeps telling me they have questions, and I don't see any questions. Okay, this is an impromptu Q&A session. It wasn't planned, it wasn't scheduled, so I'm sure many drivers are out driving, or towards the end of the evening, they're probably kicking back and relaxing a little bit for the night. Typically, I like to do my videos early in the morning before I start my day, so it's understandable. There's many, many topics to cover for an owner operator. And, every time you think, oh, I don't have anything else to talk about, well, there's plenty more to talk about. There's things like politics and trucking. I know everybody wants to avoid politics, and I get it. I try to stay independent as much as possible. The Owner Operator Independent Driver Association, OOIDA, they try to remain independent as much as possible. When big trucking highway bills are going through Congress, and they're asking for input, OOIDA is there, and they're asking for more truck parking. Well, they got to get support from both sides of the aisle, so they can't alienate, one side or the other. But, we're not just trucking, we're also small business owners. And as a general, rule of thumb, small business owners tend to like pro-business administrations. Let's just put it that way. So if it's a Democrat administration, a good question for a Democrat administration is, what are you doing to help small businesses? Well, they probably aren't doing a whole lot, because they demonize the hell out of small businesses. If you're a small business owner, in their eyes, you're the 1% that's not paying their fair share. But here you're paying fuel tax, you're paying quarterly taxes, you're paying highway heavy use tax. You're paying taxes every time you turn around. You're paying taxes. So, they're not in line necessarily with your interests as a small business owner. Generally speaking, the other side of the aisle tends to be more pro business, and this is where the politics in trucking really, it's tough, because, like I say, you want to try to be independent, but it's hard to be independent when one side has a target on your back. And we saw that with California AB 5, for example. That's the assembly bill. That's the state law in California. And they tried to make it federal law, and it would have eliminated the 1099 independent contractor nationwide. And some of the people on the spot market were totally in favor of that. The unions are totally in favor of that, because they have the PRO Act, Protect the Right to Organize Act. And a lot of times people say, well, the 1099 independent contractor is a misclassified employee. And there's different tests that they can do. But one of the tests is, are you free of direction from the company? I mean, are you under the company's control or not? Well, I can tell you at Crete, you're not under the company's control. If you don't If you don't want to take a load, you don't have to take it. If you want to shut down your truck, you shut your truck down for weather or whatever. They're not going to tell you no. You determine how much time you want to take off. You have, a significant amount of control here at Crete. So we would pass certain aspects of any kind of test for an independent contractor. Now, the spot market guys will say, look, there would be less competition. It'd be better for them if they could just get rid of those 1099 guys. Well, their point of view is that the trucking industry is a certain size, that it's like a piece of pie, and they want a larger piece of that pie. They want a bigger piece of the action. And if they could just eliminate some of the competition, they would have more loads. But what they don't give a lot of thought to is, well, where do you think these independent contractors are going to go? Let's just say it splits 50-50. 50% of them go back to being a company driver. But guess where the other 50% go? Those extra 50% go on the spot market with their own authority. So instead of eliminating competition, you actually, just invited in, hundreds of thousands of dollars into hundred thousands of drivers into the spot market. Now you got more competition. So your pie theory, you didn't get a bigger piece of the pie. You got a smaller piece of the pie. So, those are things that you look at in the politics, and actually the correct answer for everybody would be, why are we fighting over a small piece of pie? Why don't we just grow the size of the pie? Instead of having a 10-inch pie, why don't we have a 24-inch pie? Bigger pie, So that's what you want. You want pro-growth policies that grow the economy. And that's often referred to as a rising tide lifts all boats. And, that'll lift small companies, big companies alike. So with the unions, they want to go back to the heyday of the trucking industry being Teamsters Union. And Teamsters Union is a great union. At one time, I was a Teamster member. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at UPS distribution facility, Columbus, Ohio. And I would unload trucks at night and go to school during the day. And it was great. It was a great job. And the union fought like hell for better wages, better working conditions, better safety rules, things like that. So there are certain advantages of the unions. There's no doubt about it. But if they had their way, every trucking job would be a Teamster job. In reality, what it is that not one size fits all. It's like, in some cases it makes sense. Like UPS, it made sense. They had, a large population of mechanics, drivers, package handlers, and pilots, and you had a huge Fortune 500 company, probably a Fortune 100 company. So in that type of work environment, it makes sense to have a union. But does every trucking company need to be unionized? It's like, well, no, because a lot of trucking companies are small mom and pop operations with 5 trucks. Yeah, they don't need a union. And there's a saying in business is that if your company has a union, you deserve a union. That means you ran your company so poorly that your employees felt like the union was their only option. So I will say this, there's room in the trucking industry for everybody, union, non-union, spot market guys, 1099 guys. It's big industry. It's 1/6 of the U.S. economy. So it's a big industry. It doesn't have to be all unionized. It's non-union, union. They both are good jobs. They don't all have to be on spot market. They don't all have to run like California. Almost all the 1099 independent contractors in California either left the state or they had to go get their own authority. A lot of times you'll see people go to states that are more pro-business, So like Texas is very pro business, zero income tax. So, if you're a truck driver in California and you wanted to become an owner operator, come to Texas, because Texas is a big state, lots of freight. Your business would be well received in Texas. In California, it always seems like they're making the small business owner to be out to be the bad guy. They demonize the small businesses to the point where the small businesses just pack up and leave the state. So you see politics, everywhere in trucking. You have trucking organizations that lobby Congress. You have the American Truck Association, ATA. You have OOIDA, Owner Operator Independent Trucks Association. Then you have NASTI, National Association of Small Trucking Companies, NASTC. And they don't always agree. ATA tends to promote policies that favor the big box carriers. OOIDA supports the individual owner operator, whether on the spot market or independent contractor. It doesn't matter. And then NASI represents those small mom and pop trucking operations. So different groups, different group sizes, different people in the groups. The big boys in the ATA, they have different politics than the guys in OIDA. And many times they disagree. The ELD mandate is an example. When that came out, ATA supported that. The big box carriers supported that. OIDA opposed it. And it's like, oh, this is going to improve safety. And then studies came out later that shows it did not improve safety. So what was the real motivation for ELDs? Well, it was to, in my opinion, and I'm not alone in this opinion, it was to limit cheating on the spot market. Because now you have electronic logs, it'll be less cheating. It used to be on the spot market, especially when they had log books. I mean, logs meant nothing. That was just something you showed the DOT guy. But, these guys would get 5,000 miles for the week. They're taking again, we go back to that pie, they're taking too large a piece of that pie. So the big boys in ATA say, okay, we'll come up with electronic logs. Warner had electronic logs first. Then everybody wanted electronic logs. And they got passed on, through Congress, bipartisan support, under the guise of this is going to make the road safer. But what they actually did is they put an 80,000 pound load under a stopwatch. It did not make the road safer. But it affected the spot market guys, and it affected the rates too. Because everyone says, well, we want a level playing field, but you really couldn't get a level playing field without the ELDs. So it's politics. So there are times when all three trucking organizations are in agreement. It rarely happens, but every once in a while it does. So imagine if Congress wants to pass a 55-mile-an-hour speed limiter nationwide. Well, it's these organizations, these trucking organizations, going to lobby Congress and fight against that. So you can't, as a independent owner operator, 1099 guy, you can't necessarily say I'm only this type of political belief, because politics makes strange bedfellows. It's like, well, you could say you don't like the American Truck Association, but then you'll find that, they will fight for you on some issues. It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe they're not so bad after all. And that's true of the Democrats too. It's sometimes you have good blue collar Democrats that will vote against their party line. And so you can't paint with a broad brush and say, oh, these left-leaning, politicians are horrible. Well, sometimes those left-leaning politicians do things that you like build more truck parking, stuff like that. Now imagine, with the AI development and robotics, then you got automated trucks on the road. who do you think is going to oppose that? Because ATA, the big box carriers, are probably going to find ways to take advantage of those opportunities of technology. So who's going to oppose them? Well, it would be people like the Teamsters who will fight that fight. So you can't necessarily say, you know, from a business standpoint and be intellectually honest about the whole thing. You can't paint yourself in a corner and say, I'm against all unions, when there will be times when you're like looking around like, who's going to fight this? And then you realize it's going to be the unions. So now you got to show some gratitude to those union guys because they're fighting to keep that out of trucking. So that's why I say it's probably a good idea to try to be as independent on politics as you possibly can. Because every time you think you don't like one group or another group, then politics change, and then now that group is fighting for you. It's like, well, I disagree with you on these 5 issues, but I do appreciate you fighting for me on these other 6 issues. So you just got to try to be independent, and I think that OOIDA does a good job on that. They don't take sides. They just want good legislation. They want good policy. So these are things that go into being an owner operator that you wouldn't necessarily think about. You don't necessarily think about, what the politics of it is, but politics is a very big part of it. As a 1099 independent contractor, you got to know that spot market guys don't necessarily like you, and Teamsters don't necessarily like you. But it's not, you don't have anything against them, but evidently they have something against you. So it's competition. Nobody really wants competition. Everyone says competition is great until it affects them personally, and they're like, I don't know, we don't want competition. And then that's what it is. It's competition. They don't want competition. So, but competition is necessary. It's necessary for the consumer to have competition, to have different types of trucking organizations or trucking types of truck drivers compete for freight, because it keeps rates low, and that benefits the consumer. So when politicians make decisions or governments make decisions, they don't say, okay, what's best for truck drivers? No, they don't do that. They say, what's best for the consumer? And it's like, okay, let's first figure out what's best for the consumer. Consumer wants low prices. Okay, how do we get that? Well, we can't pay for all this freight. We can't pay truck drivers, $1 million a year to deliver this freight. Even if you think they're worth it, it's like, it's not good for the consumer. What's good for the consumer is trucking companies compete on freight. How do they compete? Well, they compete on whether or not they're union or non-union. They compete whether they have 1099 independent contractors, or they compete by what states they do business in. But whatever avenues of competition they can find to, try to gain market share, that's what they're going to do. And that benefits the consumer. So, as a small individual owner operator, it's like, okay, I got to be independent about business. But there are things that, independent about politics, there are things in politics that you would be in favor of, like lower interest rates, so that's going to affect your truck loan, so whoever is, proponent or supporting low interest rates, you should be in favor of that. Rules and regulations, whoever wants to cut rules and regulations, you should be in favor of that, because a lot of times these environmental rules and regulations adds complexity to the truck, making the trucks more expensive and more likely to have breakdowns. So whoever wants to eliminate more of these rules and regulations, generally speaking, you should be in favor of that. Who wants to lower your taxes? You should be in favor of that. It's like some politicians want to raise your taxes. And it's like, well, I'm not going to support you for raising my taxes. I already pay too much already. So, I know a lot of guys don't like politics, but you don't have to like it and still understand it, and understand where some politicians are helping you out, other politicians are working against you. That's always going to happen. And when you think you got it good, then new elections come around and it flip flops, and now you got it bad. So then you got to think about when to buy your truck. You buy your truck when it's advantageous for you to buy a truck. Not when you got a bad politician who raises interest rates, raises taxes, and the economy is in a recession, or something like that. It's like, well, you got to think about that. It could affect your strategy of when you're going to buy a truck. So we'll wrap this up. We went 30 minutes and gave everybody ample opportunity to ask questions. Hopefully they'll see this video and they'll post their questions in the comment section afterwards, and I'll try my best to respond. But we'll do this from time to time whenever there seems to be some extra free time. I do think we need to have an avenue for people to ask questions. And typically when I'm doing a live video and I'm using my phone, I can't read that small print. I don't know what you guys are talking about. You're just talking amongst yourselves, I guess. But if you think I'm going to read that and try to respond while I'm trying to do a live video, it's very, very hard. So I think a question and answer session would be a good forum, give people an opportunity to ask questions. All right, guys. That's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.